Well, welcome everyone. It's so lovely to have so many people joining us today as well. And I'm sure you're joining us from various different contexts and settings and probably from around the world too. So what I might ask you to do is, while I'm just doing a little introduction, if you feel comfortable to do so, please do pop on your videos. But however, we also recognize that this is lunchtime, so do feel free to leave them off. Eat your lunch, but we don't mind people drinking coffee and eating either. So welcome to everybody to do whatever is comfortable for you. But it is lovely for us to see who's here as well. So if you'd like to pop in the chat box, maybe your name and where you are, and maybe your sort of context in terms of health professions, education, research. Are you starting out? Are you looking for ideas? Or maybe you're kind of well established in terms of what you'd like to do as well. And it'll certainly help us to maybe pitch some of your questions today to Lily. So as some of you know, you may have joined us before and you may have been at the previous session. So the Incubator for Clinical Education Research Network is now in its kind of second term of evolution. And I suppose the aim of the incubator is really to build this community of health professions, educators in clinical education, and to really foster that scholarship that is clinical education research as well. For lots of people, it's a real transition time. I mean, most of you are raised in a clinical discipline, I'm sure, with a real focus on that primary research that's quite quantitative in a clinical research setting. And sometimes coming to educational research can be quite the eye-opener, quite the liminal space in lots of ways, trying to kind of understand what's out there, but really get to grips with what educational research means, and how we change, and particularly in the context of today's, I suppose, topic, which is around writing a research question. And I think this one's quite difficult to get your head around, isn't it, Lily? Sometimes when you've come from a real clinical background where we talk a lot about what works and what doesn't, and we set up clinical trials to determine what works, where it works, and how it works, particularly in the context of an intervention, a clinical intervention, or a drug trial. We ask quite different questions in educational research that really move away a little bit from the what works and does it work, to really trying to understand how it works for certain people in certain contexts, in certain places as well. And really recognizing, I suppose, that, not every learner learns the same way. That's kind of the foundational premise, I think, of a lot of our work too. And so the purpose of the incubator is really to build this community. And I don't know about you, Lily, and you might talk about your experience, but certainly when I was doing my PhD in medical education, it feels like a real solo run. And I think having this kind of community that is now a little more visible, kind of when you're out there on your own, you kind of feel like there must be a village somewhere, but where is it? And how do I send up the bat signal? Well, this is the place you're going to do it in. The incubator also has a lovely directory, and it has people on it who have come to the incubator over the last couple of years, either contributing to the Getting Started series, to our faculty development series, and people who are interested in paying it forward, people who are happy to support other researchers, early career researchers, people coming with these great ideas and trying to translate them into research questions, and to potentially guide and mentor or coach them through those initiatives as well. We're very conscious that within this group as well, I'm sure some of you are very established in your own clinical careers. Some of you are now coming into your clinical careers as well. Some of you might be medical students, and some of you are trainees as well, and hopefully coming to a community that will welcome you, and that you will find that we are we're actually very nice people actually at the end of it all. So I hope you'll find that community here for you when you start your journey into health professions, education, research. So Lily asked me to briefly mention maybe some of my own kind of research areas, and certainly that I was a physiotherapist in my first life, and came to educational research actually through medical education, and got involved with some medical registrars I was working with in clinical teaching, and very much trying to get to grips with those questions, and translating an idea, and a great idea that we all have at some part of the day or night, into an actual research question. For me, I think, Lily, is actually probably the most difficult part of building a research study, and really kind of honing it down, refining that research question. But I also have to say that, in reviewing papers, and I review a lot for journals, I've been an editor at a journal, it is amazing to me the number of research studies that are submitted that do not have an actual clearly articulated, defined research question. And to my mind, and it's a very personal thing, I think if it's a research study, one of its key features is that really defined research question. It may not be how you write it down in the end, but I think you need a research question to answer. And so we define the problem, the gap, and the hook, and Lily will talk about those kind of ways to kind of find your research question. But at the end of it all, spending that time and that extra time that it will take to really ask a defined question will pay its dividends as you work through your methodology and your study design, and actually being able to come back right around at the end of your research study and really think about, did we answer this question? And then that alignment that needs to happen through all of these workshops that you will hopefully attend over the next few weeks, that you can then align all of those pieces to that research question. And I think that's the hallmark of a really contained and boundaried study, working out what's your research question, what's your particular contribution to the next piece of work in this field. But really having a clear question is quite difficult to do, isn't it, Lily? So my most recent one I was involved in was actually around the sustainability of careers in general practice for female GPs. And when I say it was around that, that's how essentially it was pitched to me. We had some funding to look at what keeps female GPs in their careers. And actually I would like to tell you that it took me, that we did a lot of talking about that. That was actually quite a time pressured thing in terms of funding. So I had to come up with this research question quite quickly, actually. But what we thought about and what really helped us to inform that research question was trying to think more laterally about the work that had been done. As you know, we talk about barriers and enablers all the time. You see a lot of research studies that start with barriers and enablers, and you think about surveys and things like that. But I really wanted to talk to those female GPs and talk about what made their particular careers sustainable or not. And actually, as it turned out, for some women, those careers were not sustainable for lots of different reasons. But our question really was, how do female GPs perceive the sustainability of their careers in general practice? So it came from an idea around what are the barriers to staying in general practice, but then thinking a little more widely about, that diversity in experience and that diversity of narrative that we really wanted to explore and really more clearly represent in this study, and that not everybody's experiences are the same. Those trajectories are different. How can we come around to that? And that led us to a really novel way of looking at that through love and breakup letter methods. But that's another whole day's story that I will talk about another time. But if you have that question, it allows you then to align those methods to that. I hope that makes sense. That was a very long-winded way about that. So I am really delighted to welcome Lily today. Lily's an NIHR doctoral fellow in Newcastle and a GP as well. So she's going to guide you through this process of designing that research study or that research question today. We have a chat box for a reason. So please, please, please do pop some questions in there. And then while Lily is speaking today, I'll keep an eye on the chat box and we'll see, can we answer some of your questions as well. Lily, welcome.
Thank you, Eileen, and thank you for that fantastic introduction. Really, really interesting to hear about your own experience, and your study sounds absolutely fascinating. I can't wait to read that, because I think I will certainly resonate with some of those points. So I'll just share my slides. Is that visible? Is that okay, Eileen? And they're in the correct view.
Yes, that's perfect,
yes.
Lily. Yeah.
Lovely. Okay. So hi everyone, thanks so much for giving up your lunchtime to come along and listen to this talk. So this is the Getting Started series, and I'm going to be talking about coming up with an idea and writing a research question. And as Eileen mentioned, I'm an NIHR doctoral fellow, so I'm funded by NIHR to do a PhD, which I'm doing part-time, as well as my work as a GP. So I've been a GP for nearly 11 years now, and came into research relatively, I guess, late. So as a post-CCT person, but I'm here to really share my insights, and I certainly don't know all the answers or have all the solutions, but I guess I've learned through going through the process, and I wanted to share some of those insights with you today. If you are going to be needing to leave and return during the session, just worth mentioning that if you wanted to silence your notifications on Teams, then we don't get the pop-ups, which I don't know if everyone else can see, but popping up on my screen. So that would be really helpful if you don't mind doing that. Okay. So the aim of today is to help you to understand the process of turning an idea into a research question, to to share. I'll share my journey. Eileen has already shared hers, from an idea to a research question, and then to give you some of our top tips. So as Eileen's mentioned, this event is organised by the Incubator for Clinical Education Research, and we're both clinical education researchers. So if you're here as a basic scientist wanting to work out how to turn your idea into a research question, this may not be the right place for you, but you're welcome to stay anyway. But we're really going to be talking about in the area of clinical education research. And this is research which contributes to the health and care needs of society by enhancing the education, training and development of health and social care practitioners and the structures and contexts in which they work and learn, and generating this evidence to understand and support the development of education benefits both the workforce, patients and the public. So it's really, really important research. There is a fantastic website which you can have a look at if you follow that QR code there, and lots of information, including about all the opportunities and network and potential supervisors, as Eileen mentioned. So just wanted to start by sharing how I got into research, really, how I turned an idea into a research question. So all research starts with an idea, and I had been involved. So I qualified as a GP in 2015, and I had been involved in teaching medical students since I really started as a GP. And I absolutely loved teaching them. So I had 4 third years who came to the practice every week for a full year. So got to know them really, really well. But I was really struck by how few of them wanted to be GPs. Most of them seemed to want to be neurosurgeons, which was a bit concerning given the government plan of having 50% of all medical students becoming GPs at the time. So there seemed to be some issues there. And lots of them kind of said to me that the GPs they were encountering just didn't make the career seem appealing. They had lots of negativity about this specialty from their peers at university. So it just wasn't a career that they really wanted to pursue. And I, as a newly qualified GP, was obviously working 7 sessions a week and finding that the job was hard. It was, long hours, busy work, and it was quite hard to always be a consistently positive role model, particularly when you weren't getting protected time to teach. So there were also 2 important documents released around that time. So Destination GP from the Royal College of GPs and By Choice Not By Chance from Health Education England and the Medical Schools Council, which were both kind of looking at this issue of why medical students weren't choosing careers in general practice. And both of them highlighted GP role models as really important. So Destination GP highlighted that role models were the kind of #1 reason that medical students would choose a career as a GP. And By Choice Not By Chance honed in on this and said it's really important to make visible, positive GP role models to medical students so that they aspire to be like them. And then I had a serendipitous meeting with Professor Hugh Alberti, who ended up being my supervisor at an educators conference, where you go along and get trained to be a teacher. And we had a chat about this, and he said, well, why don't you do some research in this area? Why don't you, come up with a plan? So we did, and that led to a successful in-practice fellowship application, and then subsequently a doctoral fellowship application. But one of the things that was really important was that I didn't just go into this process, just with this idea, we need to sort out role modelling. I needed to actually have a sensible aim and set of research questions, as Eileen said, needed to know what it was that I was setting out to answer, because role modelling is such a huge and complex phenomenon. I needed to be specific in what I was trying to achieve. And actually that process took years. So I applied for the in-practice fellowship in 2019 and spent that kind of couple of years doing the Masters in Medical Education and also working up the PhD application. And then I was successful in getting that and started that in 2023. So I've been doing that for a couple of years part-time. But my first point really is these things take time, and it's important to spend that time and talk to lots of people in order to come up with the questions that are worth answering, because then you can build on that and develop your research methodology. So I couldn't have leapt into it saying, right, I want to do a survey to find out what people's experience of role modeling is, without going through all these steps beforehand, because actually a survey is not the right method necessarily to use in a complex phenomenon like this, but I'll come more onto that later. So Eileen's already shared her idea, so we'll skip on to the next one. So research ideas through research. So ideas through research translate into action, and all sorts of things can be an idea. So it can be a problem, it can be a question, it can be a solution. For me, it was something that frustrated me, and I could see a real problem with, I guess, the policy around recruiting future GPs, and I felt that I needed to do something about it. And that, I guess, motivated me to kind of take some action. And hopefully, through my research, it's going to be a long process, but hopefully there will be some action that comes from it. Now, qualitative research tends to ask how, what, why, or who. And quantitative research asks how much, how many, to what extent, and focuses on measurable data. So it's worth having that in your mind when you're thinking about what your idea is and translating it into your research question. Research design is the kind of overall strategy that you're going to use to answer your research questions, and it's critical to guiding the process of conducting that actual research. Good research design process outlines the background, the theory, the aims, the research questions, how you're going to collect the data, and how you're going to analyze that data. And as Eileen said, if you're looking to publish your work, which really we should be aiming to do, because that's the way you influence and share your learning, is through publication, it's important that you can demonstrate to the reviewers and to the editors of the journals that you're going to be submitting to that you have gone through that process, in order to make clear that it's research. And actually that well-designed research is much more likely to successfully answer your questions. So important things here: finding something that's of interest to you. As I said, my area of interest, my role modeling area of interest mattered to me. I was passionate about it. I was cross about it. I wanted to do something positive. So I'd encourage you all to just be curious about what you encounter in your daily educational practice, something that matters to you and to others as well. It might be something innovative and exciting, or it might be a problem, frustration, or challenge. But taking action through research, I think, can be a positive process and lead to future changes that others will benefit from. So you can change that narrative of frustration with the system into positive action, and that gives you some ownership and some control over the future, really. Important to ask yourself, is the question worth asking? And also, will others be interested in the outcome? Of course, whether it's feasible, whether it's ethical. I guess the ethics perhaps is very, very important in clinical education, but we're less likely to be experimenting, giving people medications or something like that, but there will still be ethical implications. So it's important to consider those, and of course to start thinking about the ethics application process from the outset if that's needed. Talking, really important. Talk to everyone you can. Go to conferences, go to meetings, go to Teach the Teacher events. Go and find people who are interested in clinical education. Ask them about the topic or issue that you've identified, and find out if it's something that matters to them. Do they know of any existing research in that area? Is it something that they think is worthy of investigation? Will findings be of interest to others? And at that point, I think it's worth asking friends and family as well. Even if they're not clinical, they can still provide an interesting perspective on whether your idea makes sense and is important. And then have a think about, are there any other key stakeholders who you can talk to, for example, undergraduate students, and they can really help refine your research topic and provide a different perspective. And you don't need to necessarily have a formal meeting or funding to do that. It might be that, you teach undergraduates in your practice, and you could, keep them back for 10 minutes and give them some cake to talk it through with them and see what they think. I certainly did that and found it really, really helpful. Spend time reading and thinking. It's okay to, I know it feels odd, doesn't it, when you're a healthcare professional to just take the time to read a book or to read some journal articles. But it is important to do that, and don't underestimate how long it takes to kind of to digest these things and think about them and plan your next steps. Don't rush into things. You're not attempting a formal literature review, but do try kind of read around to try and gain a broader understanding of the topic before launching into researching it. And the aim of this is really to identify what gaps are, what's already been explored, and what further research is recommended. And a lot of journal articles will list kind of suggestions for future research, which can be really helpful. Google Scholar can be a good place to start. You can ask a specific question, for example, how can students learn venipuncture? Though with Google Scholar, you do get kind of thousands of results, which can be a bit overwhelming. Textbooks, if anyone reads those, can have some suggestions and references. And it's interesting because I wrote those notes last year before AI had really taken off. But since then, I think AI has come on so much, and there are lots of opportunities there to support you with kind of identifying literature, identifying policy documents, etc. And actually that question that I suggested putting into Google Scholar around how students learn about venipuncture, actually you can get a much more nuanced, relevant response using AI. So there's ChatGPT, there's Copilot, Consensus, are the ones I've used. I don't know if anyone else wants to share any other AI tools that they found helpful in this area. Please do pop them in the chat for others to learn from. But I think it's important that when we're using AI, that we don't, let it do all the job and trust it to kind of make our decisions for us, but it actually can save time when it comes to identifying important areas to think about. And then obviously you go away and read up on the information yourself and check that that's correct. Making notes as you go is important, and keeping a record of relevant references. It's really easy to forget what that important paper was, or to forget how you went from one kind of area of interest to the next. So do kind of try and keep a log. The next step is finding a supervisor. As I said, for me, it was a kind of serendipitous meeting with Hugh Alberti at a Teach the Teacher event. But often these things do happen through serendipity, but thinking about, is there someone in your existing network who could take on the role? Someone you've seen speak at a conference, someone who's written a paper on your area of interest. Going along to meetings and conferences is really important if you get the opportunity. Some networks and organizations offer mentoring opportunities, and also there's the NIHR incubator. There's a QR code there. Clinical Research Incubator, Education Research Incubator has a kind of list of people who might be able to help with supervision. The next step after you've kind of looked at the literature is start thinking about theory. And I remember people kept saying this to me when I was starting out on my journey, and I just thought, that sounds really scary. I have no idea how this is relevant to what I'm doing. But actually, again, with time and with hindsight, I understand now that it is really helpful, and it kind of provides you with a framework around your thinking. So it's not just about collecting evidence from previous research. It's about theory, which helps you really focus on what your research questions could be. Now, when I was completing my initial in practice fellowship application, there was no AI to use to support me. So I went and had a chat with Brian Burford, who was my other supervisor, to pick his brains about theory that was relevant to role modeling. And he has huge amounts of knowledge in this area, so was able to list all these different theories. And then I went away and read up on them. But last night I tried putting into ChatGPT my question about which theories are relevant to role modelling in medical education, and within seconds it had given me reams of information, including this table, which, you know, is all very relevant to my topic. So so social learning theory, social cognitive theory, vicarious learning, sociocultural, you know, amongst others. I mean, I also read a lot about the motivational theory of role modeling, which ChatGPT didn't pick up on. So it's not going to find everything, but it can be a useful starting point. Okay, so the next step is writing an aim. So the aim of your research is a broad statement which sets out the purpose of your study, and it's usually to verb the phenomenon in order to outcome, and it should be action orientated, and really it's the destination of your research journey. It's what you're hoping to achieve through undertaking your research. So just to give you a few examples, so this is so to study undergraduate learning of clinical skills in general practice. This I wouldn't say is a particularly great aim because it's very, very broad, and how on earth are you going to, you know, hone that down into research questions and come up with an outcome? I mean, that's, I suppose, probably a massive program of research rather than for someone who is starting out in clinical education research. So I'd say that one's too broad. This one, to find out if 21-year-old undergraduates have undertaken 5 venipuncture procedures in general practice by the end of the first month in the 3rd year of their training. That's too specific. So it's, again, is that really research, or is that just a case of collecting some numbers, and how's it going to advance the field of knowledge in that area? So I wouldn't say that's a very good aim either. And then this one I would say is a better one. So to explore undergraduate medical student experience of practicing venipuncture following 3rd year clinical placements in order to identify barriers and facilitators to effective learning of this clinical skill. So you've got that kind of verb, which is exploring. You've got the phenomenon, which is medical student experience of practicing venipuncture. And the outcome is identifying barriers and facilitators to effective learning of this skill. Okay. So I would love to have done kind of small group kind of work at this stage, but we had almost 300 people registered. I appreciate that not everyone's turned up, but do you want to maybe have a go at popping in the chat an example research aim, and we can have a chat about them? So I'm going to end my show or stop sharing for a minute. So anyone want to have a go, or Eileen, do you want to tell us one of your aims while we're waiting, if you can think of any? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Well, no, I think even back to that study, really, you know, as I said, our aim was to really explore the experiences of female GPs as they navigated their careers. That was what it was. We were really setting out with a very broad mind around, we weren't trying to predict or preempt what those would be. And as you say, and I think it's important, the point that you made around, you need to have a passion for this particular topic because it has to sustain you through some, you know, dark enough moments through your study. But actually having a passion for something and really wanting to explore it and be curious, as you said, that word is so important. You're not out to prove a point. You can actually spot in a research paper when people have gone out to prove a point, as opposed to actually being curious to understand or to actually identify or describe or whatever it might be, but versus proving a point. And the research aim is so important to articulate that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. So we've got then one there. Thank you, Catherine, for sharing that. So we've got to explore patients' perceptions of the efficacy of septoplasty to inform public policy and whether this procedure should be funded on the NHS. Wow. That sounds really, really interesting. What do you think about that one, Eileen?
That's really interesting. Because I was hoping we talk about PPI contributions at some stage as well, but there it is in PPI 101. That's super.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so, Catherine, are you using kind of, in terms of efficacy, are you looking at quality of life sort of measures and outcomes, or is that a qualitative piece of work? You can just pop it in the chat box if you can't turn on your mic.
No, that's okay. I can turn on my mic. So in terms of, there's a lot of kind of quantitative data out there to say that patients do have improvement of quality of life. And there are things like SNOT-22 questionnaires that kind of, I guess, everything's subjective, isn't it? But are supposed to objectively assess patient symptoms. And all of those things suggest that actually patients do have an improvement after septoplasty, but there is some qualitative research suggests that they don't have any improvement in their symptoms after. And there are certain ICBs across the country that are now decommissioning septoplasty. So I guess just finding out a bit more about that, and actually the qualitative study that is out there only looked at a specific type of septoplasty, so not all types of septoplasty were included in that study. So it would be a qualitative study, yeah.
Great, thank you.
That's great. And I can see why that's so important, given the fact that you're saying that there's potentially going to be decommissioning of this procedure. So for some ICBs, so that's a really great aim. We've got Nina Burrows, who said to explore near-peer teaching experiences of GP trainees and medical students of campus teaching and whether it enhances their learning. That sounds really interesting as well. So by near peer, presumably you mean the GP trainees teaching the medical students.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it's just something that we've started to explore and we are doing in a sort of pilot phase, but it was just to kind of see, how we might go about proving whether it's valuable for the GP trainees and the medical students, and whether it is it's a good experience for everyone, and whether it's something we should maybe expand and do more of.
Yeah, fantastic. And there's some literature out there about that already, isn't there? So it's I guess is the gap that you're looking at, whether it enhances learning from the perspective of the medical students.
Yeah, I think we haven't really identified a gap, which is partly why I'm attending this.
Yeah,
to kind of see kind of what we do. Is I guess it's because it is the actual teaching model that we're doing is something that is slightly different as well and slightly unique, and so it's just whether it kind of adds by having adds to the experience by having the GP trainees alongside the experienced GP tutor, whether that experience of campus teaching is more valuable, or whether the GP trainees bring something more to the experience.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And I guess you don't necessarily have to compare two groups, do you? You could just find out what the good things are about that process and what the medical students appreciate it, rather than saying, is it better than the alternative?
Yes, no, I think, yeah, it would be, we are sort of doing it more like a pilot. So some of the groups have a GP training and some don't. So we could do it as a comparison. But equally it could be more just, more qualitative kind of exploration of the experience.
Yeah, and certainly that kind of the language you've used there, exploring experience, certainly aligns much better with qualitative research and using kind of therefore methodologies like phenomenology, for example, ethnography. Whereas if you were talking about comparing, in terms of satisfaction perhaps, or improved confidence in a certain area, then that might lend itself more to a quantitative approach. But yeah, that sounds great. And Laura has said, I'm doing a similar study to that, which Nina has suggested for a postgraduate certificate, GP trainee perspectives of near-peer teaching from their perspective rather than looking at the student side. And yeah, great idea to link up. So this is a great example of talking to other people, finding other people who are interested. And this is such an important area because by choice, not by chance, made the suggestion of having GP registrars teaching medical students because they're perceived as positive role models. But actually, what are the things that make that experience good? We can't just assume that plonking a GP registrar in front of a medical student will always be positive. There will be certain things that are important to bring into that process, like having protected time to teach, for example, or not having to do home visits as well as teaching, that matter. So brilliant, great to hear. Okay, I will carry on with my sorry. Okay. Everyone see that again? Yep. So yeah, I'll just mention, I was going to mention PPIE at the end, but just to build on Eileen's point there, that talking to patients and the public throughout the process is absolutely invaluable. And when I was kind of developing my PhD application, I had several meetings with a group of patients, the public, which was organised for me by the Research Support Service up in Newcastle. And they had funding to provide that free of charge to me. So they tend to support people with kind of grant applications, and they're really, really, really helpful. So I was able to take these PPI representatives through the process with me. I obviously had to start out with, be fairly far down the line in terms of what my idea was and what my aim was and my proposed research questions, but they really helped me kind of refine them and think about what I was trying to get out of this, and importantly, what the impact could be. Because particularly when it comes to like an NIHR application, it's important that your research has potential to impact on the health and well-being of the population. They're investing a lot of money into your PhD, so it's important that it's worthwhile and it does something positive. So the patient and public groups were very, very helpful in that area. So research questions. So a good question or questions makes the research doable, focused and meaningful. And ultimately your research questions are the questions that your research sets out to answer. They can be descriptive, so what's happening. They can be comparative, what are the differences between groups. They can be correlational, how are variables related. Causal, does X cause Y? And exploratory, how do people experience or perceive X, amongst others. So here's a couple of useful quotes from the literature which I found. Actually, good questions do not necessarily produce good research, but poorly conceived or constructed questions will likely create problems that affect all subsequent stages of a study. And then our questions change during the process of research to reflect an increased understanding of the problem. So probably not so much in your kind of more positivist, quantitative type research. Usually the research questions are set at the start and you stick to them and they're the same at the end. But with more qualitative research, it's not uncommon for the questions to evolve, up to the point of potentially starting to collect your data. And that's okay. The first iterations are tentative, and they provide a kind of tool for articulating the primary focus. So useful to have them when you go into those initial PPIE meetings. So this is from a really good paper from Karen Mattock, How to Write a Good Research Question in the Clinical Teacher. Don't expect the first version to be the final question. It's an iterative process, as I've said. Find out from stakeholders and published articles what the important and unanswered questions are in the area. So like I said, often there will be recommendations for further research at the bottom of a research article. Good research questions are narrow and specific, but they don't always start that way. Don't expect to make huge leaps in knowledge through your research. Make sure your research questions are manageable and achievable in the time you have. And then what kind of question, so whether it's a when, what, how, why, will determine the methods you use. Talk to your supervisors, or if you don't have a supervisor, talk to the people who are more knowledgeable, listen to their advice and refine your questions with their input. So just to give you some examples, so bearing in mind this same aim as we'd said before about exploring undergraduate medical student experience of practicing venipuncture following third-year clinical placements. So first example, how do medical students undertake venipuncture? So thinking about whether that relates to the aim and whether it's manageable and relevant, I would say that's quite a broad research question, and it's not necessarily relating to the aim particularly well. How can we make students better at venipuncture? I think that's going to be a really difficult question to answer. That's, again, very broad and doesn't particularly relate to the aim. How often do medical students miss the patient's vein when practicing venipuncture? I mean, that's almost too specific, and again, doesn't relate to the aim and to the learning side of things. And do medical students feel scared about venipuncture? I mean, it'd be interesting to know, but again, it's not really going to help you achieve your aim. So here are some that perhaps might be a bit better. So how do medical students learn about venipuncture on third-year placements in general practice? What is the medical student experience of supervision of the procedure? What factors act as barriers to effective learning of this skill? And what factors act as facilitators to effective learning of this skill? So you've got in there kind of how and what questions. So that's going to be much more aligned with a qualitative approach to the research. And probably this is all about experience, isn't it? Individual experience. So maybe using an approach like a methodology like phenomenology and doing some interviews or focus groups would be, thinking about the next steps in terms of methods. They would be the things that would kind of stand out to me, but there would obviously be other approaches that you could take. So a few top tips relating to turning your idea into a research question. So being reflexive. So that means asking yourself who you are in this potential research, what is your background and what perspective you bring, how might your experience and assumptions impact on the research. In qualitative research, there's not the same requirement to remove bias as in quantitative research, but it is essential to be open about your perspective and experience of the topic. Refine your topic. Based on your reading and discussions, focus on an area that you wish to study which is feasible, relevant, and potentially contributes to the field. Consider factors including how much time you have, what resources are available, access to participants, and approvals required. As I said, involving patients and the public, and your supervisor will hopefully be able to direct you to local resources. So different universities may have access to different groups, but as I said, the research support service was very helpful for me. Having an early meeting, sharing your ideas can be illuminating, and they'll often contribute to perspective that you hadn't considered and help with turning your idea into specific research questions. And do keep a record of those discussions, as they're helpful to refer back to later in the process. Don't rush into methodology and methods yet. This is an iterative process, and as I said, keep a log documenting the decisions that you make. So just to show you the research questions I ended up with, so after, as I said, several years of refinement, I ended up with this title, which is Supporting Medical Students Towards Careers in General Practice Through Maximising the Potential of Role Modelling, a realist review of what works for whom and in what circumstances. And these are my research questions, which are written in realist terminology. So what are the outcomes of GP role modelling in undergraduate medical education? What are the key contexts where GP role modelling occurs to produce intended and unintended outcomes? What are the key mechanisms whereby GP role modelling leads to intended and unintended outcomes? In what ways can interventions support positive GP role modelling to facilitate careers in general practice and reduce unintended outcomes? And the main reason for showing you those was really my research questions didn't start out looking like that. So I had a much more broad research question, but then started to think about, right, what's an appropriate kind of method to use to explore this complex phenomenon. And realist methods are very useful for exploring complex interventions. And they kind of sit nicely between that kind of positivist, post-positivist and interpretivist type of ontologies, and so it lends itself well to the phenomenon of interest. So I ended up selecting that method based on the area of interest and then going back and rewriting the research questions in realist terms. And it's okay to do that because it is an iterative process. So I will end this slideshow, but it'd be great to kind of hear in the chat any example research questions that you have that you're hoping to answer, if that's okay. Just while we're waiting, Eileen, did you have any specific research questions for your study?
Yeah, so that one, we had a few in the end, and again, that started out quite broadly, and then we narrowed it down. But actually, I was thinking there through what you were saying, Lily, as well, how they evolve. And one of the ways the question evolves is actually by you recognizing, as you said, where you're comfortable. And it's only after years and years I can say I'm really truly comfortable in that constructive space. I'm really happy with the grey area, and I'm really happy with the differences in what people say and how they perceive things. But actually, when you come to a research question, how you view the world very much influences how you ask that question, doesn't it? So as you said, if you're coming from a really kind of if you've had experience in things like clinical trials, you're going to ask a question a certain way. And sometimes it's about standing back and thinking, well, actually, if I put a what or a how or a who in front of this, how would that change the research question? And that will then guide those methods. So rather than just saying, I don't really know anything about qualitative research, I'll jump in and I'll do an interview study around this question. It's actually about how you ask the question may not lend itself to that particular approach, isn't it? So it's actually quite a complex thing to do to write the research question. But the reflexivity that that Lily mentioned is so important, because it's not just about you determining where you are as a researcher. We talk about insider, outsider kind of perspectives, but it's actually about what part of the world you're comfortable. If you're looking for a truth of the matter and you're out to prove a point, that kind of qualitative, particularly constructivist or interpretivist approach is really not going to sit well with you. It's always going to be uncomfortable. But actually, if you are open to the fact that you're not going to come up with a single truth, but actually variations on that, depending on people's experiences, maybe you can jump right in there as well. So it'd be worth reading around that reflexivity, because again, to come back to your question, Lily, about the sustainability study, I was working with people who had done some work in this space from that survey design kind of perspective with very quantitative backgrounds. And so explaining to them that I was actually really happy to not come up with a table of, so many female GPs like this, so many female GPs say that. I was never going to come up with that. And it was actually quite a big discussion among the team then as to how we were going to approach this, and could everybody leave that behind and jump into something new. And in credit to everybody jumped in, and we gave it a really, really it was a really interesting way for us to do it. But yeah, so that question, even within our team, was interpreted in different ways, and it took us a while to get on that same page.
Yeah, and daunting, I guess, to take people on that journey when they're so used to their more positivist thinking.
And then we went one better, and we talked about love and breakup letters, and they all thought I'd lost my mind completely, because that's just not something that was familiar to lots of people. And Megan Brown's done a lot of work in this space, so Megan came on board with us to guide us through that, which was amazing. But actually, it became a way to have a discussion with people that other interview methods might not have gotten for us. And it was a really fascinating eye-opener into using that.
Yeah. Sounds like you need to come back and do a talk for us on that specifically, Eileen.
We'll see if it gets published and I'll let you know.
Yeah, that'd be great. So it doesn't look like we've had any example research questions shared in the chat. So, oh no, sorry.
We haven't.
Catherine, thank you. So what are patients' subjective experience of septoplasty, and what would be the consequences of decommissioning septoplasty on the NHS? Wow, so very meaty research questions, Catherine. Is that something that you've started working on? How are you going about answering those?
Very much in the planning kind of process, and just trying to make sure that I haven't missed any kind of studies in the research and applying for ethics at the moment for that. But I think the plan, just for kind of time reasons, it would be retrospectively reaching out to people that have already had a septoplasty done, and a specific type of septoplasty that hasn't been researched as far as I can see so far in the published research. So reaching out to those patients and just seeing, did it make any difference to their symptoms? And I guess I don't really know about the kind of policy bit. It is really topical at the moment in ENT, and I think it would just be it's topical because it's starting to be decommissioned in different parts of the country. So I guess I'm curious about what the threshold is for commissioning a procedure or decommissioning a procedure, and if it is, it seems to be based off of this qualitative study that's come out. What the threshold would kind of be in that sense. Because the quantitative studies would suggest that it's really beneficial for patients, this type of procedure. So yeah, it's definitely not a fully formed kind of research question. But yeah, just trying to make sure that apply for ethics. And I guess it would be good to speak with patients and get that PPI involvement, because it's quite early in the process.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Catherine, is there, sorry, Lily, I was just going to ask, that's fascinating. So is there currently a tension between international practice guidelines, like evidence-based practice guidelines, be it NICE or whatever, and what patients purportedly are reporting is the quality of life?
Yeah, so so the quality of life, all of those kind of like quantitative kind of questionnaires and things would suggest that they get an improvement after having a septoplasty. But then there's been a qualitative study that came out actually earlier this year that suggests that people haven't had any improvement in their symptoms.
How big was that study?
Sorry, what was that?
How big was that study? How many people?
It was about 16 patients, I think, in the arm that had the septoplasty done, and then I'm not sure how many were in the control arm. And they also asked healthcare professionals as well what they thought of septoplasty in terms of whether they felt it made a difference. But they looked at they basically, not to go too much into kind of technicalities. What they were looking at was something called a closed septoplasty, where we use cameras to do the whole operation, so everything's done inside the nose. But if someone's got a really badly deviated septum, then we would do what we call an open septoplasty, where we make an incision, and those tend to be the septums that are really, really deviated, and there's just no way that people could breathe through their noses. So they excluded those patients. And so I think it would be interesting to actually speak with those patients. I mean, whether or not in the future only people who, only septums that are so bad that would require an open septoplasty, whether or not that continues to be commissioned, and then the ones that aren't so bad are decommissioned, I'm not sure. But it's just, I find it interesting that they excluded those patients whenever actually they're probably the ones that have the worst symptoms. And speaking with patients, anecdotally, after having an open septoplasty, they do have an improvement in their symptoms. Yeah, so I guess I should add that to the research question, that it would be specifically about an open septoplasty.
Yeah, and really defining that kind of so what there within the study for sure.
Yeah.
Great,
Lovely.
Lily.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Catherine, and thank you everyone for listening. That's all I was going to say, but does anyone have any questions?
Lots to think about. Okay, well, I don't see any questions popping through here. Lily, huge thank you. That was just so fabulous and such a really logical way to think about developing that research question. A couple of people have asked for your slides, so just to say they will be on the web page as well. And obviously you're going to have to come back when the study is your work is finished to let us know how that evolved even further. I'm completely fascinated by realist research at the moment, so I really can't wait to chat to you a little bit more about that as well. So huge thank you for today.
No
so Marta is just going to pop up a quick slide with the next incubator workshop dates. I think, Marta, is that right? And so I hope we'll see most of you at that again as your research. So I think for your homework, I'm going to give you some homework today. For those of you who are thinking about doing some research in this space, and even if it's just an outline idea, you're not tied to a master's, but you're just interested in the space, maybe try and come to the next one with some kind of research question, just so what you could have by the end of this series, try and have worked through even a proposal, even if it's not for this year, or even if it's for something you're thinking about next year, but use this workshop series to come out with kind of a little template or a little kind of map as to what you might like to do in the next few months as well, and use the workshop series to take you through those steps as well for those of you who are really new to educational research. As Lily mentioned a few times, again, if you're a little bit further down the road and you're looking at refining that question and turning it into your master's or your MD or PhD project, do reach out to the directory and see who's there, who's interested in not just your subject matter area, but actually in the methodology and the methods, the methodological approach, I guess, that you're thinking about using as well. As I said, realist research is having a moment, really, isn't it, Lily? It's really taking off, and I think it's become so relevant to health professions education as well, that I think it's really worth looking at all those options for the research questions that you have. So hopefully over the next few workshops you'll get a sense of what those types of approaches look like, and what do they look like when you go to do them as well. So Marta, I think that's it for today. Huge thank you to everyone who joined us, and especially over lunchtime. I hope you've gotten something to take away from it, and hopefully we'll see you in a couple of weeks at the next one then.